I'm going to talk about some hidden technology that was taken from World War II on a cleanup mission through Nazi Germany just shortly after the war, which is the Lockridge device, of which I have right here. I'm going to tell you a little short story that just shortly after the war, two soldiers were assigned to do cleanup operations through probably something that was going on under paperclip or something. And
Project Paperclip.
yeah, well, I don't know much about paperclip, but
that was the program where we repatriated Nazi scientists to
right.
the U.S.
Yes.
And it was known as Project Paperclip.
Anyway, one of the soldiers' names was Lockridge, the last name. And I guess they stumbled across in a warehouse this machine that was running, known as the Lockridge device, which was self-powering itself. And at that time, of course, it was built from a Bosch generator. So I guess what the soldiers did was they never turned it in to their commanding officer. They just packed it up in a box and got it at home and worked on it when they got home. And the little thing about Lockridge was that after the war, he was known as the town drunk. And anyway, a little explanation of the machine. What this machine was a converted Bosch generator that had sort of like a pull cord. And you flipped a switch, and you wound the cord around it, and you gave her a pull. And she took off and went ding, 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 until she got up to 5,000 RPMs, at which point in time you could draw a maximum load of 300 watts. And of course, at that time, it was light bulbs, because they were using it for lighting and a small little wire-wound 6-volt heater. But if you exceeded the 300 watts, you killed the machine. So, a little explanation of the machine is the generator casing, everybody knows, is this iron casing. And what was done different is a normal generator would have its poles, say, like this. And then the armature would be in between her. So you'd have a north pole here and a south pole here. And then you'd have some brushes here. And then, of course, you normally in a generator, one would go to one brush, and the other one would go to the field wire, and then the armature, which is in here in commutator segments. And you always, with a generator, when you replace a generator, use a generator, is you always polarize the generator so that there's some residual magnetism in these poles. So if you just took the normal generator and put a pulley on it and then wrapped a pull cord around it and gave it a pull, it would self-energize itself and light the headlight just for a few seconds and then go back out. But that's not the Lockridge device, because what the GI has actually seen was something far different. They couldn't figure out where the power source was or where the battery was that was running this, so they just stopped the machine forcefully, from what I understand.
What do you mean forcefully?
Forcefully, put their foot on the rotating mass.
Okay.
And stopped it. Of course, the lights went out, and they packed it up and hid it very well. Got it back home. Got it back here to the USA. And this is, I think that this is somewhere down in Boise. That's where the people that own these Lockridge machines were to be found at the time. Of course, they're all dead now, and most of the houses have been torn down. And anyway, the Lockridge device was very unique in that it had one pole piece here, one pole piece here, one pole piece here, and one pole piece here, which made it a 4-pole motor. But 2 of these pole pieces were generators, and the other 2 were motors. So this is a motor, and this is the gen. Now, something very interesting here, because this was a North Pole, and this was a North Pole, and this was a South Pole, and this was a South Pole. Well, you see, it's not 6 poles, it's 4 poles. So, in between these portions of the poles, very conveniently, if this case went backwards like this, a slot was cut to divide the case in 4 places. And we'll get a close-up on this in a minute, because there's a reconstruction of it here that they tried to rebuild that didn't work. But remember, from all my past videotapes and everything on scalars and magnets, that I said if you put 2 north poles together, push them together like this, you get a beam that appears here. So the magnetic field sort of looks like this. It's very sharp. And this is actually very detailed. But that's basically what the beam looks like. And it's north here and north here. And it's a pinpoint beam, because normally the North Pole, the magnetic field goes like this. So I've always said that by doing this, by pushing the 2 north poles together, that you're creating a scalar beam, pinpoint scalar beam. So what was really going on in this thing was the generator and the motor. The generator's a constant thing, and the motor's a switch thing. So between these two, you have an attraction field when it's generating, because these are energized. And then when the motor turns on, what happens is these 2, it interferes with this field and wants to push like this. And so it's going to do the same thing from this side. So what you have there, and then by splitting the case, you have 2 norths, north here and a north here. So they want to take that, they want to take this scalar away, so they slot the case so they don't interfere with each other. But anyway, that's just a little explanation on the scientific end of the Lockridge device, and basically what was going on in the functioning of it, and what's going on with these in this case, electromagnetic beams, not permanent magnet beams. But, so anyway, the problem with the Lockridge device was that, number one, even though it was an over unity machine, and it only produced 300 watts of usable power while it self-ran. So if you maintain the 300 watt level, the machine continued to run until the brushes wore out. Now, something very unique, if we look, at the brushes that make up this, you can get a close-up here. Notice the size of the brush that's here. It's very thin, you see it?
Okay, that's the brush at the very end. Can you put your finger on it again?
Yeah, I'll point to it here. See, it's very thin.
Right,
And it's in a special made holder
right.
so that you can adjust the... But here's the next thing. This brush, when we look at it, fits only one segment of the commutator. See, it doesn't even hit the slots.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that between two of these segments in the commutator is just a motor action. Now, the thing about this is that it needed what they found when they took it apart, and these are reconstructions of what they found, that this casing right here had a special wound coil. These were all twisted together in here. And that went on this case. And of course all these wires are because they tried to reconstruct it, but you can see that the case is slotted between these two poles. See here? So it's a split case. And the reason for that is so that the magnetic fields don't interfere on this side, here and here.
So that's the split case. And
That's the
where
split.
don't they want the...
Okay, so they don't want these two magnetic fields, these two norths, to interfere out here,
Right.
see? And here, between the souths, all right?
Right.
So this acts on the motor side as a big inductor because this was in series with the motor pulse. And it almost acts like the monopole motor into where the coil becomes and gives you that sharp spike. Well, the next unique thing that's missing from all this is that, and I'm going to erase this. Is that they built their own capacitor, and what Lockridge did, since he didn't have any money, is he would take the copper off transformers, and there'd only be about this much, and then he'd solder this together so that for about 35 feet, and he'd do this twice. They'd get enough copper to get 35 feet, and this was about just a little bit wider than what you see this coil here. So the copper was wound from, it looks like about from where this terminal is to the end case here. And what they would do is they'd put two together, butcher paper in between.
But by butcher paper you mean
Waxed butcher paper.
Did
that
they
you
wrap-
get in- Yeah,
they wrap the meat in it?
yeah. And then they would wind this around the case as a capacitor. Now that's a pretty big capacitor, but it charges very fast because it's not a lot. It's just real high voltage. It's like 400 volts. So when you take that 300 or 400 volts and these two brushes hit in exactly two of these commutator segments, the motor spins. because of the residual magnetism that's in these coils. So it's actually a series wound motor. And what I mean by series is a coil, commutator, and a coil, like that. So our commutator is in between here like this, and this one goes to a brush the way he had it hooked up, and this one went to a brush the way he hooked up, and you can see the brushes here. I'm actually moving that one there. See? Very special arrangement of brushes.
So these are the original brushes?
These are the original. This is exactly built that people that own the machine told the guy that built it.
So this is a replication?
This is a replication of what they tried to build back from that day.
From the original machine?
From the original machine. And the original machine was a Bosch generator, which was a 6-volt machine, and then, of course, they needed a 12-volt generator, so they tried all kinds of 12-volt generators. They tried Ford, and they tried Chrysler, and but the only one that would work was this Delco Ramey. Its case and the way it's arranged. It's the only one that would work. And so we've got our condenser, and so what we're doing is we're catching, when we gave this thing a pull, the generator, the motor switching actually, there's 3 windings here, see? So it's trifilar. Okay? So one of these was on the generator side, and one of these was on the motor side, and the other one is part of the circuit that helped charge this capacitor. And so this capacitor built a great big charge of about between 3 and 400 volts. Because a few claimed that when they didn't build the capacitor right, when Lockridge didn't do the capacitor right, it would short between here and there, and he'd have to replace the butcher paper. He'd have to wax it more.
It's blocking the...
So we know all this. The thing is that there was no solid state circuitry during, just shortly after World War II. We had vacuum tubes, but we really didn't have any transistor circuits. So the mistake that was made here is not that the coils were wound wrong, or the case was done wrong, or the armature's wrong. It's this. They tried to make it solid state switcher. Well, they did successfully get the motor to switch, but this is not the correct way to do it when it was a total mechanical device and using the 4 brushes to do the switching. So here's an example of everything that they did, and quite a few drawings from people that they talked to about how this machine was put together and where the pole pieces were. And a lot of notes from talking to people.
You say talking to people, talking to what?
Talking to people that actually own the machine.
Okay. Whose notes are these? Who took the notes?
I really don't want to say his
Okay.
name. But
But
anyway.
this is somebody who had access to the
Yes,
original...
yes, this is somebody that had access to the original people that worked for Lockridge. And what Lockridge did is he hired basically people that were I would say a little slow in learning. Slower than most. In other words, because he was only going to give them one job, and that job was to just make this coil. And they knew nothing else. Never did one of them actually see Lockridge assemble the machine. So not one of them knew exactly how this machine went together. It's just notes and pictures of them trying to construct the machine. And you see he made notes of what he was doing. And tests. So the man that tried to reconstruct this machine went around to all the people that owned it. Now, here's the funny thing about all this. The people were more than happy with this machine that Lockridge sold. And he would do it for very little money and something to drink. But the thing about this machine is that every one of these, he would only sell it to people that were campers. He wouldn't just go and sell it to somebody that wanted to run their house, because nobody in that town cared about running their house. So he would sell these to weekend campers who would just keep their camper warm with something that was less than 300 watts or just run lights. The problem with this machine was these brushes. We know that now, after all the reports. These brushes, when they wore out, being that there were Delco Ramey brushes for a 12-volt generator that would come off a Chevy car or a Cadillac, they would go down to the local auto parts store and say, I need a set of brushes for this, and they would put them in the machine, and they would be too thick, and the machine would never run again. So being that these people were not real well-to-do, the scrap man would come around, and they would sell the copper, because this thing was tons of copper here. Copper wire here, copper wire here. Big 35 feet sheet, and they would just sell it for scrap price to get a few bucks.
Because it was junk.
Because it was junk after that. It didn't work anymore, so it wore out. So now one of these machines is surviving, except for what you see right here. And it's built wrong. Because this Lockridge never relayed to anybody how all these circuits hooked up. And so this poor gentleman that tried to reconstruct it, and this is, I think it says right here that he started work on this in '80. At least the notes. Now here's the other funny thing. Then when he started work on this, most of the people were so old, because these were just old campers that Lockridge would sell it to. And they were so old, and they remember all about the machine because they talk about it. So, well, I just gave it a start with a pull cord, and away she went. And as long as I kept the lights at less than 300 watts, I had lights all night long, all day long, all night long, all day long. And it would even charge a battery. It would charge up your truck battery, as long as you didn't exceed the 300 watts. So anyway, this is an original drawing from a person that he found that actually worked with Lockridge. and he drew the way it was, but as you notice, he doesn't know what these boxes are or where they're going. So, what we have here is a machine that was a real over Unity machine that came out of Germany, and to this day it's a secret except for what you see right here. What we have is a machine that came out of Germany, and since he hired very slow people, and today you would say that person would be a little bit retarded. That would be the perfect person to do this, because they wouldn't know. They would only know, well, I wound this, and it was 400 feet long, and we twisted them together, and then we wound them around this tube here that we made, and that's all I did. That's all I did.
Repeating that right down to the.
Yeah, they keep repeating that because they don't know what's going to happen with this piece, and how he slotted the case, from what I understand, was they drilled holes and they filed it. This happened to be milled, milled out, and there was no, at that time there was no electronics like this at all. And this is what we have, and this is what we could find out from the people in the town. And the guy that did this, that did all this work and everything, was actually thrown off farms, thinking that there might have been a machine, say in an attic someplace like that somebody just put away and never did sell for copper. But unfortunately, to reconstruct something like this, it would take a long time. And I said I would get around to it one of these days, but I don't know which day. And because I do have it pretty well formulated in my mind about how you would switch something like this with the brushes and everything. But trying to get the manuals on a Delco-Ramy generator, there are some older books, which I did find, that actually show how this armature is actually wound, because they did change them. They changed them into it so that they wouldn't spark here on the commutators. And that probably was why the brushes wore out, because they needed to generate this radiant spike to fill this capacitor to switch this motor. And the people involved in this that actually owned them said they would give it a pull, and they wouldn't turn the lights on until it got up to about 5,000 RPMs. And that's where it ran. It ran at about 5,000 RPMs, the same as a permanent magnet motor. When you hear people talk about permanent magnet motors, they run at about 5,000 RPMs. And they all seem to do the same thing when they're using this energy. They're all around that speed. And if you think about this, 5,000 RPMs at this weight, right, is quite a flywheel.
How heavy is that?
This is about,
3 pounds, 4 pounds?
this is about maybe 8 pounds, 9 pounds.
Okay.
And the Delco generators were really heavy duty built. You can see just by the windings there.
What vintage of Delco generator would that have been?
Oh, this is 50s. This had to be 50s. Just when the 12 volts first started coming out, maybe 60s.
And this was how many volts?
12 volts.
12 volts, okay.
Yeah, he moved it from 6 volts to 12 volts. Because remember, the Volkswagen generator was a Bosch generator. So that what they brought back was a Bosch generator that was set up basically like this. And from all the people that just did one job, they constructed this. This guy drew this, and another guy
So he
drew that, and
the guy that recreated the process, interviewed all these.
Yes, he did.
Interviewed all these slow people who.
Yes,
then,
he did.
Who then drew the drawings.
right. And now, just recently, the last of them, the people that worked with this, they're gone. They just died off. And then as I look through all this, you can tell that if you don't keep a model of your work and a sample of something somewhere that's put away, well, you'll never be able to reconstruct exactly the way that it was done. So
how did you get hold of this job?
I had a friend who was tired of trying to work on it. And basically he ran out of people to go talk to. But, he says, well, John, he says, you've done a lot of things with switching. You might be able to figure it out. And no hurry. But I can tell you these days it's probably worth looking into it, except that the generators are getting harder and harder to find. And it was mechanical, so
But they could retool that kind of stuff.
they could retool this, and I'm sure somebody's already done it somewhere.
Right.
And I'm sure that in Germany they had plenty of these machines. But where they went to, nobody knows. We didn't know the exact person in
But-
Germany that he got it.
But this was found in some German's house,
Yes,
running.
yes.
So it's, the guy
When they
could have,
captured the device.
yeah. So I mean, the guy could have been working on a project somewhere. This was maybe a throwaway from the real project.
Well, it could have been. I mean, you
'Cause
know.
it presumably would be scalable.
Well, Adolf Hitler had, he was working on every device known. And they didn't, at that time, they didn't really have a lot of fuel. And I'm sure that they were under national security to keep the lights to a minimum, don't draw any power, right?
Yeah, same as Britain was.
Right, and this would be something that would give you 300 watts worth of light. So let me tell you something. If you're out in the pitch black, 300 watts worth of light's pretty bright,
Yeah.
especially if you're looking yonder down some field somewhere. But the point was it would run 3 or 4 of these seal beam car headlights, right, with no problem at all. Up to 300 watts. And I think they're 65 watts apiece. So basically there you have it. That's what we know about Lockridge.
And right here is the end of the trail.
Right, exactly.
And the guy that gave you the motor gave you the book as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Gave-
He gave me the whole box. Handed it to me in a box just like this. In fact, this is the way he handed it to me. This was just like you see it here.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to put it back in the same box. But this is the way he just handed it to me. Just like that.
Okay.
And said, have at it.
And so you figure that the missing piece in the puzzle was that when they were trying to recreate it, nobody understood.
Well,
The
what it
radiant-
was
the
is
radiant-
he hired everybody in town that was very slow in learning.
All the mentally challenged.
Yes, all the mentally challenged, because he knew if he gave them a job, they'd work for basically nothing,
Right.
right? and that they would only do that one job, and they never would go to the local bar or anything and have a discussion about what they were working on.
Right.
So,
And they're actually quite satisfied doing
oh
it.
yeah, they were satisfied doing what they were doing because the people were quite satisfied that bought the machines.
Yeah, but just to clarify, the recreated machines that were created in this country and sold to the campers were not over Unity.
These were over Unity
They were over
machines.
Unity, but they would burn out, or they
Yeah,
because when
Right,
the
because
brushes
see-
were the wrong size.
right. Well, see, this is the mistake everybody makes. It's one thing to be over Unity, and it's one thing to be perpetual. So when people say to you, oh, you've invented a perpetual motion machine, no, you have not. There's nothing perpetual.
Right.
Something breaks here or there. You know, one day the sun burns out and the earth stops turning, so it's not perpetual either.
Right.
But they're calling it that. There's a confusion between what's over Unity. When we talk about an over Unity machine it can run itself until the parts wear out and break, which this did.
But the problem was they would then replace the brushes
Right, that was the problem.
with American brushes, Delco brushes.
No, these were all American brushes.
Okay.
But they were filed. If you look at them with the most that I could run down is if you look at the brush, they had to file the brush to fit the segment of the commutator. So these are normal standard brushes,
Right.
but they're sanded down. Well, the people that own the machine figured, oh, it's just a pair of brushes and it's Delco Ramy, and they put it in the machine and it wouldn't run.
Right.
If they would have sanded the brushes down, guess what? The machine would have ran again.
Right.
So if they'd sanded the brushes down, the machine would have run again.
Yes, if
But
they
were
would
bu-
have.
But
right.
they were buying new brushes.
They were buying new brushes, and Lockridge never told one of them, you know, that the brushes that he used,
So the clearances were too small?
the clearances were too big. See, because,
Okay.
and that's a good question, because, see here, if you look, let me get my glasses here. If you look very carefully, this brush just fits.
It fits between the in the
Yes,
slot.
yes.
Right.
But the
But the new-
other brush would have been partway across this, shorting these poles out.
But the new brush would have been the same width, surely.
No, the new brush was much thicker. These are sanded.
They were sanded to a thinness.
Yes, this thinness.
Okay, so the width of the brush
Was-
was
right.
Lockridge sanded that down.
Right, like
to fit.
Hold just a
The
second,
slot.
and I'll go get a generator,
Okay.
and I'll show you the difference in the brush. Here, Tony. You can see right away what they did. Look at the size of the brush. See?
Yeah. So hold on a second. Do that again.
See, it's over the commutator segments.
Right. No, I see that. Let me see the Lockridge one again. So he sanded it down. It's thinner
Yeah, to fit this.
to exactly fit the slot
Yes.
here. Okay. So when they put the new brushes in, it wouldn't work.
Right, exactly. So they sold the machine for copper.
Yeah. That was his secret.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the secret that he kept.
I wonder why he wouldn't have them come back and buy new brushes from him.
Well, he was drunk.
Good point.
He was drunk all the time, right? And they figured, and he wasn't making them anymore.
Yeah.
He was busy chasing his wife,
Yeah.
who was a floozy in town,
Wow.
who he was going to get even with. So, anybody that works on a free energy device, you know, there's always a sad ending to this.
I was going to say, what's the moral of the story?
Well, the moral of the story is that he should have stayed in business, kept selling replacement brushes, and everything would have been just fine.
You're just fine. And forget about chasing his wife, right?
Yeah.
Who he wasn't going to, cure at all.
Right.
So,
So is this particular machine an O-unity machine?
yes.
As is?
Yes, if it runs.
If it
you
runs.
can get it to run.
Yeah.
If you could figure out the exact circuit to what these people have drawn,
Right.
it would do exactly what Lockridge's did. It's the only thing missing here is this big long capacitor.
Right.
But we know about that because it's in the notes. The guy that made it has written it up.
35 feet is a long, long length.
Well, yeah, because you need so many microfarad. You got to remember what Lockridge did. He just copied the German machine.
Yeah.
Him and his partner took it all apart and documented it and copied it. And then they both went their separate ways.
Because this must be what, about 15 feet?
Yes,
Well, yeah.
yes.
But you're saying that you could engineer around the
Well,
necessity.
today we could make this easy.
Yeah.
We could make this have this capacitor made easy because we have copper that's in big sheets, and we could stretch that out, and we can go get waxed butcher paper and the whole bit. And
Yeah.
we would want to construct it, but the problem is that everybody that Lockridge hired, this is going to be one heck of a puzzle because each one of these is barely drawn in electrical terms.
Right.
It's just a block, A, B, and C. Okay, fine. But what's in that block where A, B, and C goes? And if you look very closely, he's got this marked.
That's it. Today I have to go and wind coil B.
Yes, exactly.
And Millie here will be winding coil A.
That's right.
And we'll do it every day.
And Brother Bob will be soldering just this one sheet. And Rick tonight will be winding it around the casing. And then they'll hand me the whole thing, and they won't ever see it again. So there you have it, the story of the Lockridge device.